just that realization of, I'm practicing living in a place which, the culture and cultural norms and, the things that surround and underpin your medical practice are so far beyond anything I'd considered. Was a real shock. And I think anyone who's worked in similar places will have sort of those cases again and again.
Hello and welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast. I'm Dr. Fionn Davis, emergency medicine and expedition doctor, and I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Marcus Stevens, one of our new podcast hosts. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Fionn. Great to be here.
Fantastic. So at the time of recording, the UK is in the last throes of a summer heatwave, and I'm cooking in my very hot study. But wherever you are today, I'm glad we're keeping you company. Hope you are somewhere more exciting, more adventurous, getting outside and enjoying the nice weather and getting outdoors. So we're doing this episode to introduce Marcus as one of our new podcast hosts because he's done some pretty cool stuff himself. And it's going to be fascinating to talk to him about some of his experiences and his background. So a little bit about him. Marcus is an urgent care general practitioner and expedition doctor. He's spent a number of years working in West Africa, where he actually drove there in a Toyota Land Cruiser from London to Mali. He's led the development of rural medical clinics in Mali, Guinea and Senegal. His experiences as an expedition medic have a successful ascent of Everest's slightly more unusual at 7,050 metres and a recent summit of Kilimanjaro. He's a teaching faculty member for World Extreme Medicine and president for the Simien Mountains Mobile Medical Service, a charity offering medical care to the inhabitants of Ethiopia's remote Simien Mountains. Alongside his medical pursuits, Marcus is a keen skier, mountaineer, paraglider, and long-distance swimmer. So welcome to the World Extreme Medicine podcast, Marcus. So glad to have you. And how are you doing today?
Very well, thanks. I'm pretty warm here as well, and I'm looking forward to a bit of paddleboarding later to get out and cool down.
Oh, lovely. I'm so jealous. All I've got to look for is a night shift. So without further ado, let's get into it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about how you first got involved in expedition medicine?
Yeah, so it's a long way back, actually, and really it's what got me into medicine to start with. Back in year 10, year 9, 10, 11, I can't remember exactly when. I remember my parents first starting to ask me what I was going to do with my life, and then sort of school asking the same. And at the time I was reading a book by Kenneth Kamler. Some of you guys listening, I'm sure will have come across him. He was a micro hand surgeon in Manhattan, but joined several Everest expeditions and was the only doctor on Everest in 96 during the disaster. And he wrote an amazing book called Extreme Survival, detailing this and other exploits around the world as a doctor. And I remember my dad saying, well, if you go off and become a doctor, you'll be able to be paid to go and travel to these cool places and, explore the world. And I thought, that sounds like a fairly sensible plan. And I kind of just been too lazy to think of an alternative ever since, really. So it's always been my, as I went through medical school in the background as something I wanted to pursue more in the future. And it certainly got me through some of those slightly more tedious biochemistry lectures and things along the way. Throughout medical school, I had access to amazing lectures from nurses and doctors returning from MSF, trips, and obviously consultants returning from Afghan and Iraq, and really just try to suck up as much of that as I could, and try to look ahead to the future to when I'd be able to do it. And I was lucky enough to sort of join with a group of colleagues or friends at the time who had a very similar sort of idea and vision, and we refound the Oxford Wilderness Medicine Society, which had kind of fallen into nothing had really happened for sort of several years before. So we kind of set up the society again and ran a few events and teaching weekends and things. So long-standing interest, and been enough that it has led me to some really interesting places.
Yeah, that's actually really cool that you were thinking about expedition medicine from the start in like year 10 or something. Whereas most people kind of fall into it after doctor. You were right from the get go. How can I get paid to go to these cool places and do amazing things? Become a doctor. Yep, great idea. Love that. So you mentioned, so you set up your Wilderness Medicine Society, refounded it, and then I think whilst you were still in medical school, you did your elective out in Ethiopia with the Simien Mountains Mobile Medical Services. I'm to really concentrate to get that one out. A little bit wordy. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience with them, and then you're still involved with them now? So, what sort of work do they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, coming towards the end of medical school, elective post finals, so sixth year, later I think than some other medical schools in the UK, and it was a pretty sort of overwhelming process trying to work out where to go. I kind of knew I wanted to go to the mountains, but I kind of had the whole world to choose from, and I kind of went through various ideas in my head, and I ended up sort of coming to Ethiopia. I was chatting with a friend who was a PhD student, a Canadian PhD student in Oxford, and I said, kind of threw my kind of conundrum out to him and said, look, I want mountain somewhere interesting. He said, well, how about Ethiopia? And actually, he was doing his PhD. He'd done a lot of research previously with mates in Ethiopia. He'd spent, I think, a year in the mountains of Ethiopia, following around a troop of baboons, I think they were, knew all of them by name and things. And he said, well, he showed me some photos, and I thought, okay, this could work. And I actually just Googled, medicine, Simien Mountains, and obviously up popped this charity. And it was founded about 3 or 4 years before I ended up going, by a Belgian couple who had been trekking in the mountains and seen just how there was absolutely no medical facilities really on offer in remote parts of the mountains, and if people wanted to access the clinics they were walking perhaps for days. And she was called Wendy, Brian and Wendy. She had worked as a midwife before, and so they set up this charity, very admirably, to try and bridge that gap. And the charity was based around being a mobile charity, so hence the kind of mobile medical, and started with teams of individual nurses who would travel by foot or by mule to the remote parts of the Simien Mountains, where you couldn't get a vehicle to under any circumstances, and they carried everything they could, and they treated communities as they went. They would do 2 weeks, they would do a loop. Subsequently built a clinic, and so I went out for a couple of weeks to this incredibly remote clinic, 4 or 5 hour drive into the mountains from the nearest town, and then about a 90-minute walk into the most stunning valley. And spent kind of a couple of weeks there. Really, my first experience of medicine, not in the UK, and very much without all the things that you get used to practicing and learning as a medical student. But at times was pretty isolating and lonely and sort of mildly terrifying. But really amazing first experience of that kind of working, and loved it.
Wow. Yeah, that does sound really remote. So a 4 or 5 hour drive in and then 90 minutes walk to get to this clinic. And I suppose you were the only medical student, maybe even the only nearly doctor at that point. Did they have any doctors there or not yet?
No, so the clinic was run by an Ethiopian nurse. The nearest doctors were the kind of 5 hour drive away in a place called Tibet. There's certainly many times while I was there, didn't feel particularly qualified, despite being the kind of foreign almost doctor, as you say. Really that realization that wildly out of your depth, and just the extra skills and knowledge that you need, not only to kind of understand the pathology you're there, but understand the culture you're working in. So I'm not sure I was all that much use, but I saw it very much as a learning opportunity for me to see if I never professed that I was going to go there and save the clinic or save Ethiopia or do all that much good, but was able to, on having left and come back, I was able to speak to the charity, to Wendy and Brian, and suggest some ideas for how I thought they might be able to improve the clinic. And they, very graciously took those on and invited me to come on board as a medical advisor. Quite whatever that means. But and I'm very, very lucky to go back the year after and the year after that. So my F1 and F2 years, to go back to the clinic and sort of do more training and try and bring some of the sort of learning and education and the things we take for granted in the NHS and other sort of Western health systems, to try and sort of tease some of that across. So been involved ever since. Haven't been out for a little while actually, and obviously very sadly that part of the world, obviously Ethiopia has been in the grips of a civil war recently, which very sadly has affected some of our work out there. But yeah, something I'm very proud of, and really, if you've never been, would highly recommend a trip to the Simien Mountains. Absolutely beautiful part of the world.
And does the charity still accept elective students?
It's a bit tricky at the moment. So one of the things I did, sort of having got back, was thought, well, actually, you know what? I had a fantastic time. It's a very, because previously it was a stable, very safe part of the world. I thought actually there will be lots of people who will want to go back, and I had a couple of medical students in the years below me who'd read my report that I obviously had to write for the medical school. They'd read that and got in touch saying, look, could I go? And so we ended up establishing an elective program that at times we had, I think, sort of 8 to 12 students a year would go, either in groups of 2 or 3. And they would have a little bit of a routine. They would have some time in the regional hospital in Tibet with the teams there, and then they would have some times with the mobile nurses, and then times in the clinic. And was fantastic. Got loads of sort of great feedback from that, and doctors that had a brilliant time out there. Unfortunately, at the moment, it's a bit tricky. Although things are a lot calmer, and you could safely out there. Most medical schools, I'm not sure what your kind of elective approval process was like, but most medical schools are fairly risk averse, and anywhere a hint of sort of trouble, it's a kind of a no-no. So we'd be open to sort of getting it started again tentatively, but I think it depends a little bit on medical schools.
So let's maybe just turn a little bit to your next sort of big adventure, which was, I think, when you were driving from London to Mali in a Toyota Land Cruiser, and that must be such an adventure, driving all that way. You must have had some amazing experiences along the way. Is there anything that sort of stands out?
Yeah, it was brilliant. I kind of got the idea years before. After Ethiopia, I'd spent a little bit of time when I had a bit of a holiday in Namibia with a friend as part of my elective, and we'd come across these often couples driving Cairo to Cape Town, London to Cape Town, and suddenly had this realization that it could be done. I'd never sort of heard about it before, and it always then been in the back of my mind. In F2, I ended up buying a Land Cruiser, kind of with a vague notion that in the future I might do something. And then I got this job in Mali, in southern Mali, with Critical Care International, and I ended up realizing that maybe it was possible, and doing a bit of research and to work out, was it complete suicide, or were the borders open and had people done it? And there was various blogs out there of people that had done it in the previous few. So sort of plan. I did a rotation in Mali, and I thought, okay, the next one I'll drive to work. I coined it my overland commute, and I was looking for someone to join me. No one seemed to be free, and so eventually my dad stepped in. So me and my dad had 6 weeks, driving down through France, Spain, across into Morocco, down through Western Sahara, Mauritania, and then crossed into Senegal, and then drove from Senegal into Guinea, drove right across Guinea from west to east, and and popped into Mali. Drove to the mine where I worked, had a couple of nights there, and then dropped my dad back in Bamako, and he flew home.
Wow.
And then I spent 2 months working.
What a bonding experience for you and your dad to go through. That's awesome. And how long did it take you?
So it took us 6 weeks on the way down. I had roughly kind of 6 to 8 weeks between rotations. So I'd flown home. We sort of finished off getting the Land Cruiser sorted. Had 6 weeks sort of coming down the scenic route. And the plan was then to import the Land Cruiser to Mali, or sort of temporarily import it so I could keep it in Mali. And rather than flying home after my rotations, I would then explore West Africa, during my breaks. But it all became a bit tricky, and I ended up thinking, I'm not going to be able to get this sorted. And then I'm going to have the vehicle sort of impounded or sort of seized from me. So I thought, well, okay, let's just drive it home. So rather than taking the scenic route home, I drove essentially straight through the Sahara, drove back up to Bamako from southern Mali, almost sort of due west, hit the Mauritanian border, and then had 2 days driving straight through the Sahara, endless thousands of kilometers of sand and nothingness, driving kind of 18, 19 hours a day before I got back to civilization in Nouakchott, the capital of Mauritania. And from then on, it was a bit of an easier route back home. But I managed to get home in, I think it was about 11 days I got home. So lots of driving, and very nice to be back.
That is a lot. My grandmother used to tell us stories about she worked as a teacher in Sierra Leone, and she drove as a woman on her own all the way there and all the way back in must have been like the 1950s or something like this, post-war. No, it might have been before. Anyway, but she when she drove through the Sahara, she told the story about waking up with a lioness on her bonnet. Yeah.
Goodness me.
Yeah, apparently it was very friendly. She just had to sit there and it just wandered off on its own after a while. But yeah, I'm sure you had some good encounters along the way as well. So
Luckily,
you found
nothing
yourself
that close.
Oh, good. You found yourself in Mali, ready to start your next job, working in a Malian mine, right? And they're mining gold out there. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, so the West African gold belt kind of follows the Malian border. So you've got quite a lot of gold mining, very much southern Mali. The Malians Malians and other sort of tribal groups in that region of West Africa have mined gold for millennia. So the richest man to ever live, or the richest person to ever live, was the king of Mali, King Musa, who is said to have crashed the world economy when he marched to Mecca on a pilgrimage because he sold and gave away so much gold on the way. And he was followed by kind of thousands of camels and thousands of men, each carrying 20 kilos of gold, kind of volumes you just can't imagine. But so that whole region, to this day, you've got not only commercial mining operations, but also, what we call artisanal, sort of local small scale mining. So, local men digging shafts by hand, and digging out gold and purifying gold. So, a fascinating place to work, and your place ended up spending 3 years.
What was your role out there? What were you doing?
So I worked for a company called Critical Care International, who were commissioned by the mining companies. So we work generally with British or Australian or Canadian mining companies, and they were setting up and running gold mines in Mali, and we provided the healthcare for their workers. So we were setting up clinics to provide kind of what I thought of as sort of comprehensive healthcare. So most of it primary care, just seeing patients when they were unwell. Also there for emergency response. So we had an ambulance and we were able to respond, both pre-hospitally, or patients were brought to us for sort of initial resuscitation and stabilization, and then also primary evacuation. So getting patients from, say, the mine to the capital, where they might then either be treated there or evacuated out the country.
So a real mixture there of sort of GP plus pre-hospital plus emergency medicine. And I imagine you're seeing quite a varied sort of pathology amongst the population as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So mainly kind of young Malian men. Many of the mines now do have a much increased population of women compared to, say, gold mining operations 10, 20 years ago. So probably when I left the first mine, I set the clinic up. When I left there, there's probably percent women, but generally young, fit people. And yeah, everything from traumatic injuries, motorcycle injuries, through to chronic disease management, and then the kind of the sort of end result of chronic diseases, which you just don't see in the UK. So I think he about a 36-year-old chap who'd had a hemorrhagic stroke secondary to hypertension. So
Wow.
running a blood pressure over 200 for years, and yeah, presented aphasic and hemiplegic. So lots of that kind of management. Mali's got the second highest rate of hypertension in the world. So an awful lot of that, and then huge range of infectious diseases that I've obviously never really come across before.
Anything that stands out in your mind as really interesting cases you saw whilst you were there?
Yeah, I've got a couple. So I think the first one is probably one of the first cases I ever saw. And although I don't have a sort of the patient in my mind like I do for some of the others. It's that kind of first malaria case. Never seen malaria before. I knew I was going to see it. I'd read the WHO guidance. I knew it all in my head. But when you see someone coming in, bit of fever, achy joints, it just is that kind of completely new pathology that you've never seen. And really, I remember just thinking, I remember turning to the doctor I worked with, and he'd been sort of running a very small clinic at the mine before we got there. There was a small kind of exploration site, so they'd been exploring for gold, and then I arrived at the point where they were going to build this gold mine. So I worked very closely with Dr. Didier throughout my time there, and I remember just sort of turning to him to say, kind of, what do we do? And he'd seen thousands of malaria cases his whole life, working in Cameroon and Mali, and so really just an awful lot of learning from him. And although I was there kind of as his boss, and I was trying to coax the clinic into more British practice, not actually I learned an awful lot from him. So yeah, the first malaria case, and then probably seen a few thousand beyond then. And then early on as well, I think we did a lot of community work. So although we were looking after the patients, so we look after the workers of the mine, they were our patients. We did a lot of work in the community, in the villages surrounding the mine, supporting the national healthcare system, so the local nurse-run clinics, did weekly teaching, lots of support there. And because we got to know them, they'd often call us for advice on cases or ask us to come and see people. And I remember, I think it was one Saturday morning, Dr. Didier came in and said, "Oh, could we go and see a baby in the village just down the road?" And kind of got there, and this baby had been born overnight and had a very obvious myelomeningocele, so a sort of fluid-filled, sort of flaccid sac at the base of his spinal cord, and some clear sort of lower limb sort of pathology. So flaccid lower limbs, and I remember sort of thinking, okay, I'm way out of my depth here, but I suspect they probably need a pediatric neurosurgeon. Why don't we have a think about how we can get them up to Bamako? Would we be able to help support the family getting up to see a pediatric neurosurgeon and make a plan? And Didier sort of seemed a little sort of confused, and I sort of, not confused, but I could realize we weren't quite on the same page here. And I said, should we step outside and sort of have a chat? And he said, "Oh, no, the family will probably give the baby some poisonous leaves, and and I kind of this sort of pieces are sort of slightly falling into place." I said, "Really?" And he said, "Yeah, the baby's been born with the devil inside it. It will bring shame on the family, kind of thing." And just that realization of, I'm practicing living in a place which, the culture and cultural norms and the things that surround and underpin your medical practice are so far beyond anything I'd considered. Was a real shock, and I think anyone who's worked in similar places will have sort of those cases again and again. So we ended up, had a long chat with the family around explaining, what had happened, from a medical point of view, and that, we then had a chat to a pediatric surgeon in Bamako, and we ended up supporting them, getting them to Bamako, and so the baby wasn't harmed, and got them up to Bamako. Not sure what happened beyond that, but quite an interesting Saturday morning. Put it that way.
And I can picture you all sort of sat there having a conversation, and I bet they're looking at you like you're the crazy one. Like, of course, the devil inside this child. We cannot keep it. And you're sort of probably feeling quite isolated at that point. But yes, it's mad, isn't it? And it's really interesting to experience the different cultural norms, and that's part of, I guess, what makes expedition medicine really, really fascinating. I saw quite a lot of like shaman practices in the jungle in Amazon, in the Amazon jungle. They spent my elective out there, and we'd often get patients who'd say, "Oh yes, I've been to the shaman, or I've been to the witch doctor, and they say I have a devil inside me or something like this." And so they rubbed tree bark on my stomach, and it's not helped. And I was like, okay, right, let's go back to the start here. But often as well can be quite harmful what they do. Can be quite it can make things a lot worse as well.
We've had some couple of one that springs to mind, very sad case of a worker with a neck lump, a neck mass. I didn't see them myself, seen by a colleague. Plan sort of non-urgently to refer to the capital. So get them up to the capital, be seen in a private clinic for an ultrasound and see an ENT surgeon. And unfortunately, kind of in the meantime, went to see a private shaman, a community healer, who decided, we better try and cut this out, and ended up putting a knife through the carotid artery. I think we did a little bit of work with the sort of community healers as part of sort of health needs assessment. So we did a large health needs assessment in the area to understand not only kind of where the community wanted their sort of resources spent, where they felt the issues were, but also to try and get some baseline data on where the health challenges were. And as part of that, the community healers were kind of involved and things. And I've heard some, I'm trying to think where, I think at a Royal Society of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene in London at a conference. I remember listening to a presentation by a team researching Buruli ulcer in Central Africa. And what they did was worked very closely with the community healers to say, look, we're not going to influence what you do. But if you see, something consistent with the Buruli ulcer, you do your treatment for 2 weeks or a month. But if it's not healed at that point, could you please refer into this service? And then we will see what we think, kind of thing. And it was very much that we're not stepping on your toes, you crack on, but if you're not having any luck, here's your out as a clinician. And so they are this steady stream of referrals, which they would never have come across because they had no way of accessing those patients. So you got to build those kind of people into your thinking, haven't you?
Definitely, that collaborative working strategy, and really involving, not just kind of imposing what you think they need on them, rather than asking them what do they need or how do they want their resources spent, as you said. That must have been a fascinating kind of process to go through whilst you're out there in Mali. So I think you were out there for about 3 years or so, weren't you? And then came back. and went on another adventure. So you subsequently admitted to me that it was a Guinness World Record attempt for the highest black tie dinner in the world, which happened to be on the North Col of Everest. So sounds fascinating. How did you get involved with that?
Yeah. So one of the team in Mali had one of the doctors I worked with had summited Everest himself some years before, and was obviously well versed and immersed in sort of high altitude mountaineering world, and mentioned the point that an old colleague of his was planning this expedition, and he put me in touch if I fancied it. And clearly I said yes. Who wouldn't? And yeah, I went to had a dinner actually with Neil Lawton, who is a wide-ranging explorer and adventurer. He's just had a book come out actually. If you want to read all about him, he's done some amazing stuff around the world, and he was running this expedition to the north side of Everest to try and break this record. And they had been there a couple of years before when the whole expedition sort of got shut down because of the earthquake, and they were going back. And we had dinner and a chat around whether I might want to join as the expedition doctor. And he was a bit sort of hesitant. I hadn't been that high before, or anywhere near that high. And we kind of ended up agreeing that they were going to take another doctor instead who'd been there before, but that, he'd keep me in mind. So I kind of I sort of got very excited about it, and then sort of put the idea to bed. And about 2 months before the trip, I got a sort of a fairly urgent call. The doctor's dropped out. Any chance you're around? And I was able to move around my dates and join them for 2 months out there. And yeah, there was a group of about 10 of us that went up to the North Col. And another 10 who joined for base camp. And yeah, the plan was to get up to the North Col at 7,050 meters and have this 3-course Michelin star black tie dinner party with champagne and whiskey. And were successful in that. So I do have a Guinness World Record. I never thought when I was reading the Kenneth Kamler book about his trip to Everest that I'd be sat in a bow tie and a tuxedo at 7,000. But it was quite an experience, met some amazing people, and yeah, just obviously an absolutely stunning part of the world, albeit slightly inhospitable at times.
Yeah, definitely. And I've got questions about how the layering system worked with a black tie as well. How do you go down jacket underneath the suit or over, or how does that work?
So yeah, you very much have the down jacket over the top. The people who were the most incredible were 2 of the girls on the trip, who actually had full length ball gowns on, and at one point stripped down jackets off to get a photo. So yeah,
Wow.
they were very impressive. I was slightly more wrapped up, sort of multiple layers of thermals, then get the shirt on, and then get the bow tie on, and have it underneath a huge parka.
Yeah, wow. And to have a sort of, like Michelin starred dinner and whiskey and the whole shebang up there, what an experience. That's incredible. Any sort of medical excitement for you up there?
No, thankfully not. We were very lucky in that respect that I didn't have to sort of intervene too much. My main sort of takeaway was really just, I think, as a doctor or as a healthcare professional of any type, really, your early years of practice are there to sort of develop the skills whereby you can understand who is sick and who is not. I mean, as an any doctor, this is your kind of bread and butter, and a little bit as a GP. Occasionally, you get people sort of stagger into your consulting room who you think, "Oh Lord, you really ought to not be here. You ought to be in hospital, on the way to hospital." And to that kind of immediate triage, which you just don't have at 7,000 meters or even 6,000. You look around the table at dinner, when we're all sort of dressed in our, drags, not our black tie, and he looks awful, she looks terrible, He's coughing. I feel awful. All our sats are in the 60s, maybe a touch higher, maybe a touch lower. Who of those are sick? When I was up at that night at 7,000, felt awful. Pretty sure I didn't sleep. Where's the line between kind of normal and pathology is sort of quite tricky, and so often lots of that sort of just keeping in touch with everyone as you climb higher, working out who's doing well, who's doing not, and then lots of really lots of non-medical management of everyone. I mean, having listened to your tales from Kilimanjaro, something you guys were doing up there, but making people stop and put on more gear. I was climbing with people who done an awful lot in the mountains, but sometimes if you've got a bit cold, you're a bit hungry. I remember one day we were walking up the Rombuk Glacier up towards kind of advanced base camp, about 6,500, and long day. Everyone's pretty tired, and a couple of people started to get a bit cold. The snow came in. They weren't wearing that much because we were walking obviously uphill, and actually just had to stop everyone and say, look, we're going to stop. We're going to have a hot drink. We're going to have something to eat. We're going to put more clothes on because I can see you're getting cold, and just managing people in that way, and just making sure that you understand how people are feeling early on, getting on top of things before they come. But yeah, I was amazed. Really the main takeaway was that it's often not the medical stuff; it's the other things. It's looking after yourself. We're going to stop at this point. We're going to all drink. If you've run out of water, who has some more? Managing the group in a way that perhaps I would never have thought was going to happen.
I think that's a really interesting part of expedition medicine, is that you are sort of in a bit of a leadership position as a medic, and you do need to have some recognition of group dynamics, and you need to be quite observant. You need to kind of understand people, and you need to have a range of techniques that you can deploy to subtly manipulate them to do what you want them to.
Absolutely.
In a very benevolent way, not for their best interests. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
But you also find yourself, I'm sure you found this as well on Kilimanjaro, being called on. You can see the kind of the Sherpa team, the guides, sort of. We had one chap who didn't end up joining us on the North Col, was just sort of struggling a bit more than everyone else. And you can see the Sherpa sort of having a chat around, whether he should go on, and actually then sort of turning to us, turning to me as the doctor, sometimes wanting us to make that decision for them, obviously. And so being very cognizant, of, people's dreams of either summiting or, getting high for, obviously on this trip for the Guinness World Record, but realizing that actually sometimes, you do either have to make a decision that some people won't like, or as you say, usher people towards doing something that probably when they look back will be in their best interests.
Yeah, certainly. So just to kind of bring this all to a close, did you have any sort of final thoughts on any fascinating bits of your career that you've done so far? So all the way from Simien Mountains in Ethiopia to Mali, Senegal, Guinea, not working in the mines, working for the mines, and up to Everest North Col. Any other final thoughts or experiences you want to share?
Yeah, I think if we go all the way back to the start, and I think I've been very, very lucky to be able to experience the things I have, and I think we are at a point in kind of wilderness expedition medicine, extreme medicine, whereby this doesn't really happen by chance. Yes, obviously, a friend kindly put me in touch with someone who was going on a trip to Everest, but the days of Kenneth Kamler, good mate at the pub, who was an Everest climber, why don't you come and join me? They're long gone, and really, what we're in is I think of it as kind of a meritocracy. If you want to go and do these cool things, if you are a competent doctor and have got the skills and you can spend safely in the mountains, you can go and do them. And so I think the most motivating thing throughout my career has been that if you want to do it, you can, and put the time in to learn the skill set, and all the way through from. I often tell people, sometimes go and as you will do, sort of lecture at medical schools, or try and deliver a few humorous tales at a medical school, wilderness society. And I remember very clearly early on, sort of how demoralised I was, sort of sat in those biochemistry lectures, or on those ward rounds. But actually, those core skills that you learn back then are the ones that you're going to employ on Everest or in Ethiopia. And aside from the kind of the infectious disease and things in Ethiopia, everyone had reflux because they drank so much coffee, and so everyone would come, tens of consultations a day with reflux. And actually, if you're going to go and make a difference somewhere, having a real sort of grounding in those things is obviously crucial. So getting the basics right, and then all the way through to kind of stuff that you're never going to see in the UK, and that sometimes you do just have to read and remember what to do. And I remember early on in Mali, I strolled off from the clinic, some lunch, and I sort of, as I was strolling along, a South African chap kind of came alongside me, nice guy that I sort of have a beer with in the evening sometimes, and he's carrying a little cardboard box, and I said, "Oh, what's in there?" He said, "Oh, a snake." And I kind of, hungry, didn't think much of it. He popped this box outside the canteen, sat down with my lunch, and about 10 minutes later, sort of screams from outside, "Snake, the snake's got him." Sort of ran out to find this chap sort of rolling around on the floor outside his accommodation. Turns out he picked up this snake. He loved snakes, and he would always catch them if they were too close for comfort in camp. But he caught this snake and he popped it in the box, and he'd had a bit of his lunch, and he thought, I'll just see how the snake's doing. I'll get a couple of photos to send to my snake obsessed friends. And he just popped the little edge of this box open and tried to pop his camera in, and this Mali spitting cobra had popped its head up, aimed, and perfectly hit him in both eyes. And he was rolling around, screaming. And I ended up pinning his head between my legs, sort of on my knees, and I held each eye open while he screamed louder and louder, one by one, pouring, I dread to think, litres of water, bottled water into his eyes, until I thought, okay, how long's enough? We've been here. I'm sure now he's screaming more because of what I'm doing than the pain. So eventually sort of let him get up, and thought, what do we do next? Had a chat with my boss and thought, okay, not quite sure what the, long-term side effects would be, but I think sensible to see an ophthalmologist in Bamako, in the capital, to make sure he hadn't got a sort of significant corneal damage. So agreed, had a chat with an ophthalmologist, get a car, could drive in the 6-7 hours to Bamako. I thought probably worth us doing that day. And eventually had to persuade him that this was a sensible thing to do. Got him into the car, and we were just sort of getting him in the car, and he said, "Oh, hold on," just ran off. And I thought, he's going to refuse to go now. And he ran off to his room, and he put this cardboard box, still with this spitting cobra inside. And he carried it back to the car, and he got in the passenger seat, and he sat with this cardboard box in his lap. And I thought, what on earth are you doing?
He said, with him.
Exactly, and he said, "I'll let it go 20 k's down the road so it doesn't come to any harm."
Oh my gosh!
So
wow,
yeah. So some completely crazy cases like that obviously never have imagined I'll have come across in my career. But can look back now and have a bit of a laugh.
I mean,
and his eyes were fine, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to ask, did he have any corneal injuries or anything like that? Were they fine? Yeah.
No, they were fine when he had a look. I've obviously lost touch with him now, but we kind of kept a bit of an eye on him over the next few months, and his eyes were fine. But I think really my understanding, I'm no snake expert, but I think it's kind of contact time. So the cytotoxic venom in the eyes left for X period of time, will completely destroy your eyes.
Yeah.
It just happened that I was there literally sort of minutes later, immediately started washing his eyes
Forcibly
out quite
irrigating.
vigorously. Forcibly irrigating, exactly. Yeah. And I think managed to obviously get enough out so that it didn't have too much of an effect. So a successful case, if you will. And I ended up finishing off my lunch a couple of hours later.
Wow, well, that's definitely one that's going to go down well at the medical schools when you're doing the circuit, and I'm sure the listeners are going to love that too. Like just going back to what you were saying before, it just occurred to me to say, there's probably quite a lot of medical students that listen to the podcast as well, and it's probably quite encouraging to hear that you can go out and do this cool stuff, and that your biochemistry lecture is just a means to an end to getting you to a point where you're in Mali with a guy's head between your legs, forcibly irrigating his eyes from a spitting cobra venom. So just remember that next time you're in some boring lecture and you can't remember why you're doing this.
Absolutely.
So you're obviously joining us on the podcast, and I think you've got a few guests lined up already, but can you give us a little bit of a sneak peek or a little bit of a sneak preview on what you might have lined up for the podcast?
So I've interviewed or I've recorded a podcast in the last few weeks with a friend and colleague who I worked with in Mali around sailing medicine. So touching on what you do when something goes wrong in the middle of the Southern Ocean, days from help. I've got another colleague who again worked within West Africa, but prior to that spent about 6 months in South Sudan as the second doctor, covering an area of sort of several million people, who's got some absolutely incredible tales and lived a pretty fascinating life. And then perhaps a friend or someone from the military I know who's been a GP in the military, and while I was off sort of in West Africa in Mali, had a fascinating post F2 pre-GP training time in the military. And then if I can find someone, perhaps a little exploration I do at the moment in the Scottish Highlands as an urgent care and out of hours doctor, kind of covering remote areas of the Highlands overnight and at weekends. And actually some of the Highlands and Islands work in Scotland is fascinating. Doctors covering sort of small A&Es and GP clinics, perhaps the only doctor on the island. So I'd be really keen to find someone with some fascinating tales, perhaps from a few decades of work in remote parts of the UK to bring to the podcast. So fingers crossed, manage to get those people on over the next few months.
Fantastic. Looking forward to hearing it. And if there is anybody listening who maybe thinks they fit that bill of, remote Highland out of hours GP with some experience that maybe wants to get in touch via social media or via the WEM website. And it goes for anybody else who thinks they've got some good stories or some good experiences to share, wants to come on the podcast, please do get in touch. We're always looking for guests. And we look forward to hearing your next podcast coming out over the next few months, Marcus. Thank you so much for joining me and having a bit of a chat, and enjoy the rest of your day and your paddleboarding. I'm so jealous.
Thank you. Can't wait. It's quite warm in here, so I'm looking forward to getting outside and I imagine falling off into the river at some point. But it's been lovely to chat. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars and indeed the collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical and performance medicine. Thanks again.